Imagine Your Life Like This by Sarah Layden. If the crab shack were a ship, Annie would be the mermaid figurehead at the prow. Hair blown back by the double doors opening off Route 52, legs confined by a short pencil skirt. High heels, even though her calves and ankles ached. Breasts, yes. Unlike the elaborately carved mermaids of yore, hers were covered by low-cut silk blouses. In truth, a polyblend. The idea, Phil said, was to make people feel fancy about going out to eat. That was Annie's job, her presence fancifying decades-old tile, pocked and chair legs scraped, and lending class to the signboard featuring a cartoonish trawler chuffing along. At the crab shack, nowhere near an ocean in any direction, the lights were dimmed out of necessity. Cheap bulbs that made Annie look sallow, which she resented each time she walked past the netting-draped mirror to grab laminated menus with full-color photos. Some diners would order by pointing at the pictures, unwilling to engage further, like they were quiet and powerful fishermen, even if the seafood arrived frozen off a truck from Chicago. Phil, sitting on her couch after closing, was like, "Geez, Annie, give them a break. They're tired from working all week. They can act how they want." Phil tried to give her a back rub, and she sidled away. She thought, but did not say, "I can act how I want, too." She was back in school, for one thing, after flunking out 15 years ago. She would manage her shifts and classes better this time around. She had a duffel bag with her clothes and makeup case in the car. Now, on her way to class, she wore jeans and sneakers and imagined her younger classmates seeing her in spike heels and miniskirt instead. They would probably think she was a secretary and ask her to waive the bursar hold on their registration. Then they would realize, "Oh, Annie, it's you." Never mind that they didn't know her name yet. "Do you work here?" And she would say, "No, I'm the head hostess of a restaurant." But she wouldn't say which one. Phil had given her free appetizer cards to pass out to students. They were rubber-banded in her backpack. The first time around, she had failed all the courses she now found fascinating: sociology, intro to art history, Spanish, biology 1. Now she would take notes through every lecture and recitation, her hand a pale fluttering flag throughout the class period. She tried to forget about before, back when she couldn't have been bothered. In those days, Jackson was the only thing on her mind, when she would see him and where they would get an apartment for which she'd buy new bath mats and doormats. And sure, it was a long commute to school, even further from her family. And then she was missing classes, and Jackson said, "Hey, what's the point anyway?" She couldn't find an answer. He was 7 years older, handsome in a menacing way. Enough. She didn't want to think about her ex-husband. Her first anthropology class of the semester was in 10 minutes, and she sailed across the quad, skirting 2 large buildings that housed lecture auditoriums, and up 3 flights of stairs. Her bag was still light. She was waiting on payday to buy textbooks. If this large public university were a ship, she would be the one swabbing the decks. Last class of the day, then back to the crab shack, where she did not swab anything, not in her nice clothes and heels. On the door of the anthropology classroom was a handwritten note. "Professor Lang is ill and will not be in class this afternoon." A hand reached over Annie's shoulder and grabbed the piece of paper. Annie jumped as a woman's wrist grazed her hair. "We must jettison this post-haste," the woman said, crumpling the note. "Professor Lang?" Annie asked, recovering her composure to gaze skyward at her new instructor, who was nearly 6 feet tall and swathed in scarves and a flowy skirt. She jangled when she walked, large silver hoop earrings swaying as she tossed the paper into the classroom trash bin. Annie stared. Why not just say "throw away"? "Me?" she said. "Heavens, no, and thank God for that. Professor Lang has gone mental, which I suppose is a form of ill. But the good professor won't be in class again, let alone this afternoon. At least not in this institution." Oops, bad choice of words. Annie wondered if that was a joke. After a handful of students sauntered in, headphones screwed deeply into ear canals, the professor clapped her hands together briskly and commanded, "Let's begin." There was an audible sigh. It was a beautiful fall crisp day, a new beginning, and these teenagers already were beaten down by routine. Annie was unsympathetic. If her job at the crab shack had taught her anything, it was that sometimes life was trash, but you had to stand up straight and smile anyway. Even if the customers didn't notice or care. Even if the place smelled like a stagnant beach. Even if your manager loved you one day and hated you the next. Annie counseled a whole fleet of waitresses out by the dumpster in the parking lot. They would smoke cigarettes and talk about what else they'd rather be doing. Now Annie was dating the manager, Phil, whom she'd overheard Maya call a walking flip side of a would-you-rather drinking game. Would you rather drink from the grease trap or go out with Phil? Maya was bitter. Phil didn't put up with insubordination or slacking, and she was on notice for both. Do your job, and your manager was a non-issue. And he was fine as a boyfriend, Annie had said to herself then and many times since. He had talked about moving in together, and she demurred, offering school as an excuse. We'll probably see each other a little less, she told him, especially at exam time. School comes first, he had said, saluting her. The professor messily sheafed through an armful of more syllabi than attendance warranted. It seems the good Professor Lang had many plans for us, she said. I was just called in, so you'll understand if I haven't exactly sorted this out. In the doorway, a man with long dreadlocks appeared. He wore a replica Woodstock t-shirt, cargos, and combat boots. Need a teaching assistant, he asked. The professor's face glowed. Oh, Cliff, good to see you. You'd be a wonderful TA. Alas, I have no budget or authority. He gave a good-natured shrug and left. Professor Gregory turned back to the students as if surprised to see them there. A lanky boy who had folded himself into a desk raised his hand. So, who are you? She paused to consider. Why, I'm nobody. Who are you? He lowered his hand. Kyle, he said. You don't sound very sure, she said. Interesting. I am Lucinda Gregory. You may call me Lucinda or Ms. Gregory. How about Professor Gregory? Asked a girl with a perfectly straight blowout and tiny nose ring. Lucinda or Ms. Gregory, repeated Lucinda Gregory. You mean you're not a professor? Lucinda carried the stack of semi-sorted pages to the far side of the room, as if to begin distribution. She had inherited a small class, less than a dozen students. With a ta-da flourish, she dumped the syllabi and Dr. Lang's lesson plans into the trash can. Her poor aim sent several pages over the side and onto an empty desk. She didn't notice. What does it mean, she mused, to mean something? Oh boy, muttered Nose Ring Girl. Case in point, Lucinda Gregory said. Why, oh boy, and not oh girl? You are, after all, a girl, a woman. What's your name? Chelsea, she said, like an accusation. So, Chelsea, what makes you use an expression that has little to nothing to do with you? The girl nervously touched her nose ring, then picked up her pen. She wrote nothing down. It's just something people say, she said. Yes, but why? Why? That, students, is what I want you to explore in this class. The whys and the wherefores, the reasons behind the things you say and do. And then write it down. Fieldwork, exploration, ethnography. Kyle stared incredulously around the room and caught Annie's eye. She shrugged. Just because she was the oldest student in the room didn't mean she had to be translator. Anyway, she was similarly bewildered. I thought this was intro to anthro, Kyle said. Lucinda sighed with theatrical flair. She stalked over to the trash can and picked out a single syllabus. Examining it, she tore the header off the first page, then tore it again to remove Dr. Lang's contact information and name. She waved the slip of paper, Introduction to Anthropology, Ant 101, like a tattered little flag. I can see you need proof, she said. Anybody else? I've got more. Annie gave a nervous laugh. She was in no way qualified to teach anything, yet imagined that she had more authority than her professor, who refused to commit to the title. Rank mattered. When somebody asked to see the manager at the crab shack, Annie got Phil. Let him deal with the disgruntled masses. Annie had worked there so long that she had everyone's cell numbers, a key to the supply closet, and another to Phil's office, and was the emergency captain for fire drills. Maybe she wasn't running the ship, but damned if she wasn't facing forward at the helm, the good luck charm closest to the danger, who saw everything coming and went through it first. She couldn't have moved if she wanted to. Who else would welcome the customers? Slow night at the Crab Shack with at least 3 tables of single diners who rebuffed any conversation. Annie grabbed her new green notebook from beneath the reservation blotter and tried to come up with interview questions for herself as per Lucinda's worrisomely vague instructions. Start with the essentials, Lucinda had said. Ask yourself the most essential question you can think of. The essentials in Annie's life. She had been terrified of going back to college. Years ago, Jackson had laughed when she confessed that she longed to do something other than work at a restaurant. Maybe be a nurse or a dental hygienist. Something with a future, you know. You want to look inside people's mouths? You want to wipe their butts? Forget that. It's disgusting. You'd come home smelling like other people's bodies. Jackson worked construction and came home smelling like other people's houses. The 2 of them lived in a 2-bedroom apartment off the interstate. The complex was nice enough. It had a pool, a covered parking space for Jackson's pickup. In the years since they split, she shuddered any time she saw a truck with a skull and crossbones decal. It was never him, but it could have been. The Crab Shack was steady work, which also meant it never changed. Greeting and seating, drinks filled to overflowing, whole forests worth of napkins. Adults wearing bibs. Annie never felt gratitude for the regulars' patronage, not like Phil, who sucked up to them like a blowfish with a faux hawk, who told everyone they had a beautiful family, even the groups who came in wearing visibly stained clothing and misshapen grins and smacked each other before the fried appetizer course. None seemed particularly grateful for Annie's contributions to their meal. A smile, a nod, that was about it. She had overheard the Thompsons' bratty little son, barely 10, call her a bleach-blonde bimbo. Mrs. Thompson focused closely on her lobster, head tilted as if she were listening to its last words. Annie could guess where he had learned the phrase, which did have a nice alliterative quality. Also essential, she had gone back to school anyway, and the fear was lessening each day. Tangible items like textbooks and a campus map grounded her, helped her feel connected to the neatly plotted expanse of the quad, where students lingered and chatted with utter ease and belonging. Annie had no time to pause. She was setting her alarm and getting to campus early. She was leaving afterward, back to the Crab Shack. Her hair, pinned up at the neck, had begun to fall down, and she gathered it back into the clip. Come on, she would not let bleach anywhere near her hair. The box said Honey Blonde, the brand with the ad declaring, because you're worth it. For some reason, she wrote this in her notebook. Phil materialized at her elbow, a crease between his eyes. Babe, is that homework? Oh, sorry, she stammered, stashing the notebook beneath the reservations. Tonight there had been none. It was slow, so I thought. Totally slow, he agreed, sloth-like. Listen, use my office instead. You can save your work on my computer and at least sit in a comfy chair. What about hostessing? Maya can cover. She's been playing Uno with Raphael all night anyway. Annie exhaled. I brought a flash drive, she said, a campus freebie at registration, along with a bright red stress ball. Phil logged into the computer and left her alone. The chair was very comfortable. Annie's fingers warmed up and flew across the keyboard, her thoughts unlocked. Out of habit, she reached for the middle drawer of Phil's desk and pulled. Locked. Credit cards maxed out. Annie was careful with her budget, and she had saved for 2 years to pay for the upcoming semester's tuition, parking pass, lab fees, and textbooks. But she had not accounted for inflation. Textbooks were outrageous now. After rent, payday would not be enough. Did she still need to buy Dr. Lang's anthropology textbook if Dr. Lang was no longer the professor? Lucinda Gregory had mentioned no texts. Anthro could wait. Biology and interpersonal communications could not. Part of her savings came from small amounts taken from the restaurant's petty cash. It was a loan, she told herself. Only she knew the terms of the arrangement. Phil locked the drawer, but she knew he kept the key atop the framed print of an iceberg and a whale. Phil would give her money if she asked. She didn't want to owe him, though in fact she did now. These were her essentials, some of them, and she could not, for the life of her, figure out how to fit them in the form of a question, essential or otherwise. Jeopardy and Alex Trebek sprang to mind. What is being called something you aren't? Who is a woman older than her classmates, but not so much older that the campus and or local newspaper would write a feature about her? Who cannot say her ex-husband's name aloud for fear of conjuring him? She was more prone to statements, not questions. She was the type of woman who would unlock a drawer and take what she needed. Books were essential. It was almost noble, she told herself, to steal for essentials. The next class, Lucinda Gregory met the students in the hall outside the classroom and ushered them to an outdoor courtyard with wrought iron tables. She shooed away the few people already congregated there, announcing that she had reserved the space. Her wink to Annie indicated this was a lie, but it was a nice day, so Annie kept her mouth shut. We'll start with a little light yoga, then head to our new classroom, Lucinda said. Kyle wore a Pacers jersey with a white t-shirt underneath, stretching his enormous wings to mimic Lucinda's warrior pose. My coach is going to love this, he said. You play basketball? Chelsea asked. Like on our college team? Now they were pals. After a 10-minute warm-up, Lucinda led the students to the engineering building. Start of semester rejiggering, she said. A larger class needed the old room. This smaller classroom held lab tables. In one corner waited dreadlocked Cliff, bright blue eyes shining. Surprise, he exclaimed in a soft voice. Lucinda registered Cliff's presence with wariness, as if she had taken a pull of coffee and found it to be Kool-Aid. No worries, I'm here on a pro bono basis, he said. She ignored him. I only have a few copies, she announced, passing out papers. It would seem that my copier code has ceased functionality. A glitch of the modern age. Please share with a partner. Cliff crossed the room to Annie's seat. Partner up, yeah? Some of Lucinda's copies were stapled upside down, another fault of the copier. The article was about meditation, learning how to unlock the secrets within your unconscious mind. Deep breathing, attempting peace. How is this anthropology? Chelsea asked. Think of this as a pre-writing exercise for your papers, Lucinda said. Deep six your expectations. Before we can dive into our work, we must dive into ourselves. Kyle muttered loud enough to be heard. What the fuck? Lucinda offered a wan smile. We all need to work on ourselves, some more than others. Read through the steps and then begin. Begin what? Chelsea was almost vibrating with incredulity. Begin meditating, of course, Lucinda said. I'm going to start right now. She perched on the desk, cross-legged, and closed her eyes. Nervous laughter erupted. Cliff silenced the class by holding up one hand. It works, he said. Just try it. A few students opted out. Chelsea scribbled notes in her planner. Assignments, Pilates, work schedule, all laid out neatly in little calendar boxes. After 30 minutes, Lucinda cleared her throat. Cliff nudged Annie's foot with one combat boot, and she reluctantly opened her eyes. His gaze unsettled her. You went all the way out there, I could tell, he said. Lucinda clapped her hands. Pen and paper time, she said. Write about what you experienced for your autoethnography. Come to office hours if you want to discuss. What if we didn't experience anything? Chelsea asked. Lucinda either didn't hear or pretended not to hear. Annie was fully relaxed. She had never done anything like that before, and while she may not have gone all the way out there, whatever that meant, she had stilled her mind. It felt revolutionary. You've got to try, she told Chelsea. Chelsea regarded her older classmate, head tilted, her blowout frizzing. Annie smiled at her. In return, Chelsea leaned forward. She sniffed Annie's hair. Girl, you smell like French fries, Chelsea said. I was hungry the whole class. The Java Brewhouse was where Lucinda held office hours. Hippie chic with a colorful chalkboard of specials. Behind the counter, Cliff turned on a blender and 2 industrial-sized coffee bean grinders. A woman holding a sleeping baby glared at him, then resumed describing the benefits of chia seeds to her friend. Annie tiptoed around the baby to Lucinda's round two-top, where books and papers were spread out before her. You like this better than an office, huh? Annie asked. Don't have one, Lucinda said, crisp and businesslike. A faint jingle came from her person. Maybe if I'd been called in earlier, they would have found space for me. Did you always want to be a professor? Annie asked. Oh, God, no, she said, and I'm not really one now. I teach. I'm part-time. Professors do something more important. She waved one hand vaguely. It's beyond me. I wanted to be an astronaut or an archaeologist. That's how I fell in love with anthropology. Annie's own childhood dreams were to be in commercials, mainly so she could eat unlimited sugared cereal. That, or she wanted to be an Olympic swimmer, even though, as a 5th grader, she was too nervous to compete at the swim meets she had been training for, causing her parents to decide it was a waste of time and money. Now she needed to get through prereqs before she could apply to the nursing program. Those didn't seem like details worth sharing with her teacher. I've been out of school for a while, Annie admitted to Lucinda. Could you narrow down what you want with this assignment? Lucinda squinted at her. Like a prompt? That would be great, yeah. Lucinda reached under her scarves and into her blouse, straightening a silver chain with dangling dog tags. No, she said. Let your confusion be your guide. You are the subject of your cultural study, and the approach for the autoethnography is yours. Figuring it out is part of the work. But I'm not ethnic, Annie said, just as Cliff brought over a green smoothie and a latte that neither had ordered. Annie went beet red. Cliff could pass for a white man with a tan, as Jackson would describe himself during summer construction season, his skin bronzed and branded with extreme tan lines that never faded. Annie's mother would have called Cliff a mix. Her father would have used other words, which Annie knew better than to say out loud. No offense, she said quickly. Cliff's impassive face made her stomach drop. Hey, you can't help your pigment situation, he said, then burst out laughing. He handed her the latte, which she gratefully accepted. Taste test this for me. He gestured to the open notebook on Annie's lap. Life is a blank slate, no? My background is white, Annie said, as if to apologize. Basically blank. She sounded like Jackson, forcing a classification where none was required. So European and whatnot, Cliff said, like Ms. Lucinda and her kin. Lucinda and Cliff locked eyes in some understanding that shut out the world, that shut Annie out, embarrassing her. Annie stared at her notebook. Remember my first paper for you? Cliff asked Lucinda, and she pursed her lips before sipping the smoothie. It looked like a weedy lawn. Not now, Lucinda murmured. I wrote an ode, he told Annie. Cliff, Lucinda warned. Annie checked her watch. She still needed to change her clothes before her shift. The answer for her paper was that she wasn't going to get an answer. My essay was about admiration, he said. Whatever you write, Annie, will be totally unique and cool. I wouldn't stress. Annie smiled. When did you graduate, Cliff? Future tense. When will I graduate? He said. My victory lap's gone on for a minute. Lucinda can tell you. Lucinda pointedly waved goodbye to Cliff. Nobody's a blank, she told Annie. Everybody comes from somewhere. A culture, a group, something larger than yourself. Write about that. I bet you'll have lots to say about your life. Her eyes trailed Cliff back to the counter. The dog tags jingled. I'll try, Annie said. Are those yours? They belong to my departed, Lucinda said. Her expression was inscrutable. God, I'm so sorry, Annie said. Iraq or Afghanistan? Lucinda focused on Annie again. What? No. We broke up. It was for the best. And I got to keep these. She clinked them together between thumb and forefinger and winked at Annie. Later, when Annie saw Cliff leaving an American Sign Language class, she asked him about his autoethnography. Ethnos, he said, from the Greek. Folk, people, nation. I'm not Greek either, she tried to joke, but he didn't seem to hear. I mean, what did you write about? Some of his classmates were leaving the room. They signed parting sentiments, laughing silently. Cliff joined in. Annie understood none of it. She was fascinated. Maybe she would register for ASL in the spring semester. If the Crab Shack had a deaf customer, she could greet them in their language, actually have a conversation. What if the ones who pointed to their orders on the menu were deaf? She hadn't considered that before. Cliff continued talking with his hands. Kind of a tribute, I guess you'd call it. Sorry, how's that in ethnography? She asked. Yeah, no, he said, turning back to her, tapping 2 fingers against thumb with an exaggerated frown. It wasn't. I got points for creativity, though, and probably flattery. With no computer at home, Annie's flash drive stayed tucked in her backpack. She wrote by hand, continuing the work she had started in Phil's office, where she had unlocked the desk drawer and taken 5 20s, enough for her remaining textbooks. He checked in on her twice, and the second time there was a look on his face that made her wonder. Had he seen her somehow? Or heard the metal drawer opening and closing? Did he have a hidden camera, or was he purposely setting her up to find out who had taken the money? Phil did not keep good track of finances. She saw him stuff crumpled wads of bills into the manila envelope. For all she knew, he was using that cash for his own purposes. Maybe underreporting the books, fudging the margins. It didn't take an intro psych course. She suspected Phil because she felt guilty. She would pay the money back in time. She filled the bathtub with nearly scalding water and a heavy pour of lavender bubble bath, balancing her notebook and pen on the tub's edge. She was free associating about Jackson and his meanness, and the way her mother looked at her when she dropped out of school, without the slightest hint of surprise. Pretty much everyone in their family had dropped out at some point. They failed. Her mother gave her a similar look when she announced she was getting a divorce. Her mother loved Jackson and his Tom Cruise jawline, and so had Annie. His looks and charm fooled everyone. Her mother said that she was overreacting the time that Jackson put Annie in a headlock at a cousin's pool party and dunked her repeatedly, turning her hair to seaweed. You can't take a joke, they all said, when Annie stormed off wrapped in the faded red towel with hibiscus print. The same towel she took to Florida when the divorce was finalized. She put Disney World on her new visa and ate alone at the German beer garden in Epcot Center. Meant to be liberating, it was the loneliest 5 days of her life. She tried to make conversation with the Spanish-speaking maids at her hotel, minutes outside the Magic Kingdom, but hundreds of dollars cheaper. None of the maids had been to Disney World. ¿Sabes Mickey y Pluto? Annie had asked, her limited Spanish like a low-budget educational children's television show. Sí, claro, the maids acknowledged, smiling, but there the conversation stopped. Now, after a week of college-level Spanish, she could have talked about the weather, offered an orange, or they could have sat together on the back lot's concrete parking bumpers, commiserating and smoking cigarettes. The back stoop, where her parents sat her and her little brother Donnie when they locked them out of the house. Annie understood by age 6. They were either fighting or screwing, maybe both, and Annie kept her hands over Donnie's ears. Annie heard everything. After, they would unlock the door but wouldn't open it. Annie knew to wait, not only for the click of the turning lock, but the footsteps retreating. Once, Jackson had locked her out in winter while she was wearing only a bathrobe. She could hear the crystals forming in her wet hair, fresh from the shower, crackling pieces of ice scented like freesia shampoo. She shivered, too proud to go to a neighbor's door. They did not know any of their neighbors. She shivered now in the hot bath. "Stupid white trash," Jackson had said from inside. "Why do I bother with such a piece of shit? Tell me you're done lying, and I'll open the door." She swore that she hadn't lied when he asked who had come over while he bartended at his second job. She was alone the whole time. But that day she became a liar because she wanted back inside, and it was easier than trying to convince a man who would not be convinced. "I'm done," she had said, as quietly as she could, mouthing the words in the dark sliver where Jackson had parted the blinds. His face had brightened, his lip curled. "I knew it," he had said. The lock turning, the door opening, to inside where it was warm, where Jackson did what he did to her, and it was somehow her fault. "Because I love you so much," he would say, tearful, and she believed it. His tenderness in those moments convinced her. Desire filled her. They would make up, everything fine between them for weeks, even a month, until he would turn on her. No one knew. Not her mother, not Phil. Soon, Lucinda Gregory would know. Annie was writing the story down, planning to share it with a teacher who was practically a stranger. Was this an autoethnography? She wasn't sure. She dropped the notebook onto the bath mat and dunked her entire head beneath the soapy water. Stayed there until she couldn't any longer. Bubbles climbed up her nasal passages, and she emerged, sputtering. She had at least one more page to write. Annie arrived early to campus so she could type and print the paper. Rather than pack her work clothes, she was wearing them. A gauzy blouse and tight black pants that needed to be washed. Chunky red lacquered jewelry, gold espadrilles. Girl, she did smell like French fries. In the computer lab, she checked her email and found a personal message from the registrar. Annie's anthropology professor, the email stated, was not Lucinda Gregory, but Dr. Lang. Her new classroom was the one Lucinda made them vacate after the first day. Re-enrollment in a different section was an option. It was early in the semester. Accommodations would be made. The registrar closed with a kicker. "Lucinda Gregory is no longer employed by this university. We suggest you end or avoid all communication with her." Annie replied at once. Why fire somebody in the middle of the semester? Is Lucinda Gregory okay? What happened to her? The response arrived in minutes. "I am not at liberty to discuss personnel or former personnel matters, but rest assured that Ms. Gregory appears to be fine. She was never officially hired to teach your section. The university and I once again apologize for this complicated situation and wish you the best of luck." Annie blew out a long breath she didn't know she had been holding. She wanted her professor, fake or not, to read her work. She wanted credit for having done this difficult task. She saved and printed a copy, tucking the pages into her bag. An email from Cliff materialized on the screen. She opened it by clicking the mouse like a game show buzzer. He asked how many semesters she had left, as he was nearly finished through the GI Bill. And what were her thoughts on Italian films? The campus film festival was coming up. "Mayhaps you'd like to join me," he wrote. His autoethnography was attached, in case a model would be useful. She read his paper, heat rising in her cheeks at the erotic allusions to an unnamed mentor, a statuesque woman who wore her beloved's dog tags, naked, in bed. Annie trekked to the far-flung engineering building at class time to see if Lucinda might have come to say goodbye. 2 students who hadn't checked their messages were the only ones there. Kyle and a petite girl who had never spoken. Wherever Chelsea was, no doubt she had taken action. Annie gave them the lowdown, and Kyle lowered his forehead to the desk and gave 3 quick taps. "What a pain," he said. "But there's no class today, so that's a plus." I mean, there is, but with a different professor in another building, Annie said. I'm heading there now if you want to come. Kyle smiled, the picture of innocence. Yeah, I didn't see the email, he said. The petite girl spoke for the first time on her way out the door. It's been real, she deadpanned. Annie hustled across campus and climbed the stairs to the old anthropology classroom. In the vestibule, Lucinda sat alone at a study table. She saw Annie immediately. I was hoping we'd cross paths, she said. Annie slowed down. Are you okay? What happened? Lucinda rewrapped the purple scarf around her neck with a flick. They asked me to teach the course, she said, back in the spring. I'd planned on the income. Enrollment was low, so they gave my section to one of the full-timers, Jenny Lang, who then wants me to cover for her so she can give a talk. She didn't offer to pay me. Put it on your CV, said Jenny. Well, I do it for free. I am doing it for free. Actually, I paid for parking to teach this class. I'm sorry, Annie said. You should talk to your boss. Your old boss? Lucinda waved her off. He's useless. And Jenny Lang's not speaking to me at the moment, understandably. She used to be part-time too, and has since risen in the ranks and esteem of our glorious institution. Not mental. I shouldn't have joked. She's off presenting conference papers, whereas I prefer working with students and being a student of life, and so... Annie wasn't sure what to say. The silence hung over them for a thick moment until Lucinda clapped twice, clearing her air. Your autoethnography. Have you written it? Are you ready for me to read it? This wouldn't count. Lucinda Gregory wasn't her teacher anymore. Annie paused. She wanted to ask about Cliff and his tribute to his teacher. Had Lucinda gotten in trouble for dating a student? She wanted to ask, what's his story anyway? And why had Cliff mentioned your kin's ethnicity? Had they disapproved of him or the relationship? She kept her questions to herself. She and Phil were still together, at least technically, for now, and Dr. Lang's class could wait a little longer. Annie took the neatly stapled pages from her backpack, where the appetizer coupons for the Crab Shack remained. She gave the whole stack to her teacher. From my restaurant, she said, with a kind of apologetic pride. Thank you. How thoughtful, Lucinda said. I will use them post-haste. Take a stroll. Give me 20 minutes. Then we'll talk. All right, Annie said. She scuffed the hallway in her gold espadrilles, glad she was not watching Lucinda read her paper about Jackson. The years she endured, scars inside and out, hidden in her mind's closet. Writing the paper unlocked the door. She had thought she would be more scared about what would emerge from that dark interior. Instead, the story turned factual, black ink on white paper, like some distant historical past. She used to think that artifacts just were a collection of things dug up and dusted off, but it turned out you could make them yourself. In an hour, Lucinda's feedback would be an artifact. Her class already was archived. Within months, this semester would be over, and Annie would be looking back on this moment as what? She didn't know yet. Mentally, she calculated how many paydays until she could repay her debt. Then she would start fresh, find a new job, break it off with Phil, whose kindness did not make up for absent spark. He deserved better than what she gave and what she took. Annie took a long drink at the fountain and resumed walking the halls. She passed the open door of an ASL class where the words, I love you, were red-markered on the whiteboard inside a crookedly drawn heart. The students signed in unison, I love you, I love you, I love you. Cliff stood at the front of the room, demonstrating, his classmates' faces rapt. Maybe they saw Annie standing there, and maybe they didn't. Mayhaps. She felt like an intruder, but she couldn't turn away. I love you, they repeated with their hands. She was not their subject. Still, A wave of feeling washed over her. You, in the hall, European and whatnot. You survived to tell the tale, to share your story so someone else could hold it for you. Only 7 minutes had passed. She crept around the corner to peek at Lucinda. Annie's paper was on her lap. She scribbled longhand notes across the page. Chin atop fist, she shook her head and wiped away tears. Annie slipped around the corner and leaned her forehead against the cool glass case that held a coiled emergency fire hose. Witnessing Lucinda's reaction loosened a tightness around her ribs. Yes, what happened had been that bad. All the signs Annie had missed or ignored. "It's because I love you so much," Jackson would say, cradling her narrow shoulders, mindful to avoid the bruises in the shape of his fingers. "I love you too," she would say. They had meant it. They were lying. She could practice saying it true. Alone in the hallway, she repeated the motions the ASL class made, watching her hands move in the reflection of the glass case. The signs weren't hard to learn once you knew them. 2 fists crossboned over the heart, then an escaped pointer finger, singling out the beloved. You, I love you. Imagine your life like this, where words disappear, become action.